The entire thing began because I had a big mouth and a leaking trash bag. Not exactly the sweeping prologue of a classic love story. I know. I was standing in the dim hallway of our apartment building at 6:40 on a Friday morning. Barefoot, half asleep, and actively losing a battle against coffee grounds dripping onto my gray sweatpants, when my neighbor, Claire Bennett, stepped out of apartment 4B. She was dragging a suitcase. A massive, heavy-duty suitcase, the kind people pack when they are either fleeing to Europe or finally done with everyone's nonsense. She had her sunglasses pushed up into her dark, tumbled hair, a wrinkled linen shirt that looked effortlessly cool, and the exhausted, sharp expression of a woman who had slept maybe 3 hours and decided politeness was no longer worth the emotional currency. I'm Ryan Mercer, 32, and I work as a radio producer for a local morning show in Nashville. My entire professional existence revolves around making other people sound incredibly interesting before sunrise. By the time I actually get home most days, I have just enough charm left to apologize to my microwave. Claire was 29, a graphic designer, and the quietest storm I'd ever lived next to. For 8 months, our neighborly rapport had been built entirely on polite hallway nods, borrowed phone chargers, and one highly dramatic incident where I killed a huntsman spider in her bathroom while she stood on the closed toilet seat, wielding a bottle of lavender shampoo like a blunt weapon. After that, she started calling me Spider-Man, but only when she was tired enough to let her carefully guarded exterior slip. That morning, she took one look at my dripping trash bag, raised an eyebrow and said, "You know there are easier ways to move out." "I'm not moving out," I muttered, trying to shift the bag. "I'm just giving the hallway carpet a light breakfast." A tiny twitch appeared at the corner of her mouth. In Claire's language of subtle expressions, that was equivalent to a standing ovation. Then my eyes drifted back to her massive luggage. "Vacation?" I asked. She looked down at the suitcase as if she'd forgotten she'd been dragging half her closet behind her. "No. A work trip got canceled at the last second. I already took the vacation days, so now I'm officially going nowhere with a ridiculous amount of luggage." Sounds exactly like my last 3 relationships. This time, she actually laughed. A quick, genuine, surprised sound that made something stupid and reckless do a flip inside my chest. I should mention here that I hadn't taken a real vacation in 4 years. My sister had recently delivered a guilt lecture so spectacularly powerful that I had finally broken down and booked a small, weathered beach cottage just outside Wilmington for the week. It had an ocean view, a screened-in porch, and 2 bedrooms, mostly because the 2-bedroom place was weirdly cheaper than the single studio cabins, and I'd convinced myself that extra space was healthy. I was scheduled to leave that afternoon, so I said it, because I was exhausted, because she looked inexplicably sad, because sometimes a quiet wave of loneliness makes a man mistake sarcasm for bravery. "Well," I said, lifting the heavy trash bag away from my leg, "come with me." Claire blinked, her expression freezing. "What?" "I'm heading to the beach right after work. You've got packed luggage. I've got a rental cottage. It's highly efficient. We can just tell people we planned the whole thing." I waited for her to roll her eyes. I waited for her to say, "In your dreams, Spider-Man," or deliver any other normal, socially acceptable rejection. Instead, Claire just looked at me. For a long, quiet second, the hallway hummed with the sound of the building's ancient pipes. Then she said, "Okay." I let out a single laugh, expecting her to join in. She didn't. My laugh died so quickly it felt like it should have been outlined in chalk. "Okay as in, funny okay?" I asked. "Okay as in, I'll go." The trash bag chose that exact second to drip something icy and sticky onto my bare foot. I stared at her. "Claire, I was joking." "I know." She lifted her chin, though her voice softened, losing its sharp edge. "But I'm not." There are rare moments in life when a man's brain opens 17 browser tabs at once and every single one of them crashes. Mine was entirely frozen. Is she serious? Is this an elaborate trap? Did I even clean the passenger seat of my car? Do I own swim trunks that don't look like they survived a shipwreck? Does she actually feel safe with me? Is that comforting or slightly insulting? Before I could voice a single one of those thoughts, the elevator let out a cheerful ding. Mrs. Alvarez from 4A stepped out. She took one slow, deliberate look at me, barefoot, holding a leaking garbage bag with juice on my ankle, and then at Claire with her suitcase. A massive smile spread across her face, as if she'd been waiting years for this exact scene to play out in her hallway soap opera. Well, Mrs. Alvarez purred. It's about time. Claire's cheeks instantly flared pink. Mine probably did too, but I was far too busy pretending I hadn't just accidentally invited the prettiest, most elusive woman in our building to spend 7 days at the ocean with me. I cleared my throat, desperately trying to find my voice. We're not. Vacation, Claire interrupted quickly, her voice tight. Mrs. Alvarez's smile only grew wider. Of course you are. The elevator doors began to slide shut behind her, but not before she threw me a knowing wink that made me want to immediately pack my bags and move to another state. Claire looked back at me, really looked at me, and for the very first time since I'd known her, that protective wall she always carried around slipped away entirely. I just need to get away, Ryan, she said quietly. And I really don't want to go alone. That was the moment where a mature, grounded adult would have paused and discussed healthy boundaries. Instead, my phone buzzed violently in my pocket. A text from my sister appeared on the screen. Please tell me you're not going on that sad little vacation all by yourself. Claire read the screen before I could tilt the phone away. She met my gaze, a tiny, defiant spark returning to her eyes. So, are you saving me, or am I saving you? I'll pick you up at 3, I said. I spent the next 8 hours behaving like a man who had made a colossal, impulsive mistake and was only now realizing that vacations involve things like extreme physical proximity, pajamas, and the terrifying possibility of watching someone eat peel and eat shrimp with their bare hands. At the station, I was completely useless. Dave, our morning show host, noticed it immediately during a commercial break. You look weird, he said, staring at me through the studio glass. I always look weird, Dave. No, this is different. This is panic masked by excessive hair gel. I accidentally invited my neighbor to the beach. Dave slowly lowered his coffee mug. Accidentally. I meant it as a joke. And she said yes? Yes. Is she attractive? I thought of Claire standing in the dimly lit hallway, her heavy suitcase in hand, trying so hard to look brave but failing just enough to make me want to protect her from whatever was hurting her. That's not the point, I said quietly. Dave grinned. So yes, definitely yes. By noon, the story had spread like wildfire through the office. It reached our traffic reporter, our intern, and even the guy who services the vending machines. Suddenly, everyone was an expert. Separate bedrooms. Tina from traffic warned me. Obviously, I replied, rolling my eyes. Don't say obviously like you're offended, Ryan. Say it like you actually respect women. I do respect women. Then stop sweating through your shirt. By the time I pulled up to our building, I had changed my shirt twice, purchased an array of road snacks designed to make me look both thrillingly fun and deeply responsible, and vacuumed the interior of my car with the frantic intensity of a forensic investigator cleaning up a crime scene. Claire was waiting on the curb at exactly 2:57 p.m. She had on the same suitcase, white sneakers, a casual denim jacket, and her hair was down now, cascading over one shoulder. She held a steaming paper cup of coffee in each hand. I brought you one, she said as I got out. You didn't have to do that. I know. That's why it's nice. I took the cup, and for some reason, the simplicity of that sentence hit me much harder than it should have. We loaded her heavy suitcase into the trunk right next to mine. There was a sudden, agonizingly awkward pause when we both reached for her passenger door handle at the exact same time, as if the car itself required some sort of formal physical ceremony. Claire broke the tension first. Should we make rules? Yes, I said entirely too fast. Absolutely. I love rules. She slid into the passenger seat, settling in. Rule number 1. If this gets weird, we immediately say it's getting weird. Agreed. Agreed. Rule 2. Separate rooms. Already booked. 100%. Rule 3. No pretending we know each other any better than we actually do. That one made me look over at her. She was staring straight out the windshield. People do that when they travel together, she murmured. They try to speed things up. Okay, I said softly, shifting the car into drive. No speeding. She nodded, seemingly satisfied. We pulled out onto the road. 5 minutes later, she turned to me. Also, if you snore, I reserve the right to smother you with a decorative throw pillow. Entirely fair. The first hour of the drive was carefully navigated. We stuck to safe, uncontroversial topics. Our jobs, the building's disastrous plumbing, and Mrs. Alvarez's terrifying, surveillance-level knowledge of everyone's personal business. But somewhere past the Tennessee border, the highway stretched out, the heavy gray sky opened up, and Claire finally took off her sunglasses. I was actually supposed to go to Atlanta, she said quietly. For the work trip? She nodded. A client presentation. A massive one. I spent months building the entire campaign from scratch. Then, yesterday afternoon, my boss called to tell me he was going in my place. Ouch. Not just going in my place. He's presenting it as his own work. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, a sudden surge of protective anger flaring up. Are you serious? He can just do that. Welcome to the glamorous world of corporate design. And you didn't say anything? She offered a dry, humorless smile. I said several things. Professionally, of course. Which in corporate speak means absolutely nobody listened. I didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a cheap platitude, so I went with raw honesty. That is incredibly awful, Claire. Her shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch, releasing a breath she'd been holding. Yeah, it is. A few miles of quiet asphalt passed before she added, My ex works at the same agency, too. The massive suitcase suddenly made perfect sense. Ah, I said aloud. Yeah. Is right. Bad breakup. A quiet one, she said, looking out at the passing trees. Honestly, those are worse. No screaming matches, no shattered plates. Just two people slowly, silently becoming complete strangers while sharing a Netflix account. I nodded, feeling a dull ache of recognition. My last relationship ended because she told me that being with me felt like waiting at a bus stop for a bus that was never going to arrive. Claire turned her head to look at me, her eyes curious. That is incredibly specific. She was a poet. Was she any good? At leaving? Spectacular. Claire laughed, a warm, resonant sound, and the temperature inside the car suddenly felt a few degrees friendlier. By the time we stopped for gas, the strict rules we'd set had softened around the edges. Not broken, just gently worn in. Inside the convenience store, Claire inspected the snack aisle with the gravity of a surgeon. You can tell everything you need to know about a person by their road trip snacks, she declared. I see you bought pretzels, water, and peanut M&Ms. Stable, reliable, but slightly repressed. What do my choices say about me? She slid sour gummy worms, barbecue potato chips, and a bottle of sugary iced coffee onto the counter. "They say you're a raccoon with a tight deadline," I told her. She beamed, flashing a beautiful smile at the cashier as if I'd just paid her the highest compliment imaginable. Back on the road, a steady rain began to drum against the windshield. Claire curled one leg up underneath her on the seat, holding out the bag of gummy worms between us like a silent peace offering. Somewhere in North Carolina, my phone buzzed on the dashboard. It was my sister. Without thinking, I hit the speaker button. "Ryan," Julia's voice boomed through the speakers. "Tell me you made it onto the road." "I'm on the road, Jules." "Are you alone?" Claire's eyes widened in amusement. I panicked, my brain short-circuiting, and said absolutely nothing. My sister let out a dramatic gasp. "Oh my God, there is a woman in the car." Claire leaned closer to the console. "Hi, Julia. I'm Claire. I'm currently saving your brother from a sad, lonely beach vacation." There was a pregnant pause on the other end, and then, "I absolutely love her." My sister proceeded to fall entirely in love with Claire for the remaining 12 minutes of the call. She loved her career, she loved her voice, she loved her questionable snack choices, and she especially loved the fact that Claire had successfully forced me to interact with another living human being near a body of water. "I wasn't forced," I protested. "You were spiritually coerced, Ryan," Julia shot back. Claire had her hand clamped firmly over her mouth, laughing silently. When the call finally ended, she looked over at me, her eyes shining. "Your sister is incredibly intense. She teaches kindergarten. Her entire personality is built around crowd control. She worries about me." I kept my eyes focused on the rain-slicked road. "She thinks I work too much." "Do you?" "Yes," I admitted. The honesty of the answer surprised even me. Claire didn't press the issue. She just nodded softly and fed me a gummy worm. We finally reached Wilmington long after dark. The streets were slick and gleaming under the amber glow of the streetlights. The cottage was nestled 20 minutes past the main town, tucked away near a quiet, secluded strip of beach. It sat nestled between rolling sand dunes and weathered houses raised on tall wooden stilts. The rental looked significantly smaller than it had in the glossy online photos, because rental properties always do. But it had charming blue shutters, a slightly crooked porch swing, and the deep, rhythmic hush of the ocean breathing somewhere out in the darkness. For the first time all day, the banter died, and neither of us spoke. Claire let out a soft, whispered, "Oh," just that, but I felt the exact same shift in the air. Inside, the cottage smelled of lemon cleaner, salt, and old wood. There was a tiny kitchen, a cozy living room featuring a faded striped sofa, and a wall of windows looking out into the pitch-black expanse of the ocean. I walked down the narrow hallway to inspect the bedrooms. One had a beautiful, inviting queen bed. The other was dominated by a set of wooden bunk beds intricately shaped like a pirate ship. Claire stepped in behind me, stared at the wooden ship's wheel attached to the top bunk, and slowly turned her head to look at me. "You said 2 bedrooms. This is technically a bedroom. Ryan, this is a lawsuit waiting to happen, but with pillows." I stared at the pirate-themed bedding in disbelief. The listing specifically said, "Second bedroom." The listing was clearly written by a pirate. "I'll take the bunks," I offered. "Ryan, come on. I'm entirely serious. I've wanted to be a captain my whole life." She leaned her shoulder against the door frame, watching me. "You're way too tall. I'll adapt. Men have crossed oceans, Ryan. Not in a twin bed with a fake wooden mast, Claire." We stood there in the narrow, dim hallway, completely exhausted and trying desperately not to laugh too loudly, in a house that suddenly felt incredibly intimate. Finally, Claire sighed. We'll figure it out tomorrow. Tonight, Captain, choose your ship. I gave her a solemn salute, which earned me a fond roll of her eyes, but she was smiling as she dragged her suitcase into the queen room. I changed in the bathroom and climbed awkwardly into the lower bunk, my knees bent, listening to the heavy wind buffet the windows. 10 minutes later, a soft, tentative knock sounded on the door. Are you alive in there? Claire's voice whispered. Define alive. She pushed the door open. She had changed into loose gray sweatpants and an oversized black t-shirt, her dark hair woven into a loose braid over her shoulder. Without her makeup, stripped of her protective hallway armor, she looked younger, softer, and honestly, far more dangerous to my peace of mind. The heater is making a weird clicking sound, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. Is that normal? Probably. Probably? I'm a radio producer, Claire, not a furnace priest. She chuckled softly, but then her shoulders tensioned again. I've always hated sleeping in new places. The vulnerability in her voice completely changed the atmosphere of the room. I sat up too quickly and cracked my head hard against the bottom of the top bunk. Claire winced. Oh no. Are you okay? I'm completely fine, I lied, rubbing my throbbing forehead. I came here to offer you gentle reassurance, and instead, I'm falling victim to natural selection. She sat down on the edge of the lower bunk, close enough that I could catch the scent of mint toothpaste and fresh rain in her hair. For a long moment, we just sat there, listening to the rhythmic clicking of the heater. I almost didn't come, she said softly. I almost didn't let you. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. That sounded wrong, I corrected quickly. I just mean, I was worried it was incredibly impulsive. For both of us. It was. Yeah. But staying in that apartment felt so much worse. She began tracing her thumb along the hem of her sleeve. My ex, Mason, texted me this morning. He told me he hoped I wasn't being dramatic about the Atlanta situation. I felt my jaw tighten in the dark. Wow. He has this terrifying ability to make me feel like my reaction to being mistreated is the actual problem, rather than the thing that happened to me. That's not an ability, I said quietly. That's just a talent for being an absolute jerk. Claire looked up, a tiny, breathless laugh escaping her lips. You say things like you're joking, but you actually mean them. Occupational hazard. Her gaze held mine for a second too long. The heater let out another loud, sudden click, and we both jumped slightly. Claire stood up quickly. Okay, I should go back to my room before I say something highly embarrassing. Like what? She paused in the doorway. For one fleeting heartbeat, I thought she might actually answer. Instead, she just gave me a soft smile. Good night, Spider-Man. The door clicked shut. I lay back down in the lower bunk, my forehead throbbing, the ocean whispering outside, and realized our carefully constructed rules were already in serious jeopardy. The next morning, I woke to brilliant sunlight, crying gulls, and Claire screaming at the top of her lungs from the kitchen. I bolted down the hallway so fast I nearly took the wooden ship's will off the wall. Claire was standing on top of a kitchen chair, pointing a trembling finger at the counter. A tiny, sandy crab was sitting peacefully right next to the coffee maker. Claire looked at me in sheer horror. I looked at the crab. The crab raised one tiny claw in our direction, as if it, too, had paid a security deposit for the cottage. I let out a heavy sigh. I'm starting to think this vacation has a distinct theme. The crab and I stared at each other like two men who had both made incredibly poor lodging decisions. Is it poisonous? Claire whispered from her perch on the chair. Claire, it's a crab. That is not a definitive answer, Ryan. It's not poisonous. Are you absolutely sure? No, but I'm trying to project strong leadership here. The crab scuttled a fraction of an inch closer to the toaster. Claire gasped as if the creature had just brandished a weapon. I grabbed a large mixing bowl from the cabinet and approached the counter with the extreme caution of a bomb disposal technician. The crab raised both claws high, felt deeply personal. Listen, I muttered to the crustacean. I don't want any trouble. Why are you negotiating with it? Claire cried. Because he's armed, Claire. After 3 failed attempts, a highly embarrassing yelp from me, and Claire frantically shouting, Use your knees! For reasons neither of us will ever fully comprehend, I finally trapped the crab under the bowl. We carefully slid a plastic cutting board beneath it and carried our tiny hostage outside. At the edge of the grassy dunes, I lifted the bowl, and the crab fled toward the freedom of the sea. Claire climbed down from the porch chair, which she had apparently brought outside for safety, and clapped enthusiastically. My hero! You say that now, but I distinctly remember screaming once. Twice, she corrected, grinning. We made a pot of coffee after thoroughly inspecting every single kitchen cabinet to ensure no other wildlife was hiding in the mugs. We took our cups out to the porch swing. The morning had painted the beach in soft, silver blue hues, and the ocean rolled in with slow, patient waves. Claire tucked her feet under her on the swing, and for a long time we didn't say a word. It was the very first silence between us that didn't feel like a gap we needed to desperately fill with words. I forgot what it felt like, she said softly, her eyes on the horizon. To be at the beach? To not be constantly bracing myself for something. At work, with Mason, even just in my own apartment sometimes. Like I'm always waiting for the next offhand comment, the next little disappointment. I wanted to say something profoundly healing, but honesty was the only thing I had. I'm really sorry, Claire. She nodded, her gaze softening. Me too. After breakfast, we walked along the shoreline. Claire collected seashells with the intense focus of an archaeologist, and I carried her sandals because she claimed that pockets on women's clothing were a capitalist conspiracy. By afternoon, she had relaxed enough to start teasing me about my questionable sunscreen application. You completely missed your left shoulder, she pointed out. I did not. You have one highly confident patch of bright red lobster skin, Ryan. I twisted around, trying to look at my own back, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down right there in the sand. Later that afternoon, a heavy rainstorm rolled in without warning. We ran back to the cottage, soaked to the bone and completely breathless, leaving a trail of wet footprints across the hardwood floor. Claire stood in the middle of the living room, her hair dripping wet, her t-shirt clinging to her skin. Well, she said, wiping water from her eyes. This is incredibly romantic in movies, but in real life, I am just damp and highly irritated. I can make a soup. You can actually cook? I can heat up canned soup. Let's make an important distinction. We changed into dry, warm clothes and ate hot tomato soup out of mismatched mugs while a thunderstorm rumbled directly over the roof. The lights flickered twice, then died completely, plunging the cottage into darkness. Claire froze, her spoon suspended halfway to her mouth. No, she groaned. It'll come back on, I reassured her. The cottage answered by growing even darker. I rummaged through a kitchen drawer, found a few emergency candles, and lit them. The entire living room transformed, turning a warm, flickering gold. The rain hammered against the glass, making the ocean sound closer, louder. Claire sat cross-legged on the sofa, wrapping a thick knit blanket around her shoulders. This is exactly how every classic horror movie begins, she whispered. No, horror movies start when people make the terrible decision to split up. We're not splitting up. So, if we hear a terrifying noise in the basement, we don't have a basement. That is exactly what the basement wants us to think, Ryan. I laughed, and she smiled warmly into her mug. We ended up playing cards by the dim candlelight. She beat me 3 consecutive times and immediately accused me of letting her win. I am incredibly competitive, I protested. If I were letting you win, I would be much nobler about my defeat. You do seem like an exceptionally sore loser. I am a deeply layered loser, Claire. Eventually, the card game was forgotten. The candles burned down to glowing stubs, and the heavy rain outside softened to a gentle patter. Claire looked at me over the edge of her blanket, her eyes dark and serious in the flickering light. Can I ask you something? Maybe too personal? Rule number 1 says you can, even if it gets weird. Why did you actually book a 2-bedroom cottage for just yourself? I rubbed the back of my neck, staring down at the candle flame between us. Because I thought, maybe if I had extra room, my life wouldn't feel quite so empty. I let out a dry breath. That sounded significantly sadder out loud than it did in my head. It just sounded honest, she said softly. I'm not very good at stopping, I admitted. Work is just easier than trying to figure out what it is I'm actually missing. And what are you missing? I looked at her. That was the real problem. For the first time in years, I knew the exact answer, and I didn't trust myself to say it. Before the silence could stretch too far, Claire's phone lit up on the coffee table. Mason. His name on the screen felt like a physical intrusion in the small room. She stared at it until the ringing finally stopped. Then, a text notification popped up. Don't ignore me. We need to talk about what you've been telling people. Claire's face went completely pale. What does that mean? I asked. With trembling fingers, she picked up the phone. Another message flashed. If you're away with some random guy just to prove a point, it's pathetic. The walls of the cottage suddenly felt suffocatingly close. Claire stood up abruptly. I need some air. Claire, it's pouring outside. I know. She grabbed her denim jacket and stepped out onto the porch. I followed her, stopping in the open doorway. The cool rain misted across the wooden floorboards. She was gripping the porch railing tightly, her shoulders shaking as she breathed in the damp air. I hate that he still has the power to do this to me, she said, her voice cracking. I hate that he gets to decide what this is. She turned around to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. And what is this, Ryan? The question hung in the air, heavier than the storm. I could have played it safe. I could have said it was just a vacation, an accident, a funny story to tell later. Instead, I stepped out into the rain and looked her in the eyes. It's starting to matter to me, I said. Claire's eyes searched my face, looking for any sign of a joke, but finding none. Just as she stepped toward me, the porch light suddenly snapped back on. The power had returned, bright, harsh, and loud. We both flinched, suddenly feeling like guilty teenagers caught in the act. Inside the cottage, my phone began to ring loudly. It was Julia. Claire let out a shaky, breathless laugh, wiping a drop of rain from her cheek. You should probably answer that. I did. My sister didn't even bother saying hello. Ryan, she gasped. Please tell me you are not currently on the local news. My stomach dropped. What? At that exact second, Claire's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Alvarez. Saw a photo online. Is that you and Ryan kissing on the beach? Claire and I stared at each other in utter bewilderment. We didn't kiss, she whispered. Ryan, Julia's voice yelled through the receiver. Why does the entire internet think you two are engaged? As it turned out, the internet thought we were engaged because context is entirely optional on social media. Julia sent over a link while Claire and I stood dripping wet on the porch. It was a photo taken earlier that afternoon by a local tourism account. In the picture, I was kneeling in the sand directly in front of Claire, holding her foot. What the caption failed to explain was that I had been carefully removing a sharp piece of broken shell from her sandal. The caption read, "Spotted. A beautiful beach proposal just before the storm hits." Claire stared at the screen, then at me, and then back at the screen. "Well," she said faintly, "at least my hair looks fantastic." I started laughing first. Couldn't help it. The sheer absurdity of the entire day. The leaking trash bag, the pirate ship bed, the crab, Mason's texts, and Mrs. Alvarez managing to spy on us from 3 states away. It all broke loose at once. Claire tried to maintain her composure, but she failed miserably. We stood there in the pouring rain, laughing so hard that Julia started screaming through the phone speaker. Ryan, are you engaged or do you have a concussion?" "Neither, Jules," I managed to choke out. Claire took the phone gently from my hand. "Hi, Julia. We are definitely not engaged." There was a brief pause, and then I heard my sister's voice clear as day. "Yet." Claire handed the phone back to me as if it had suddenly caught fire. The next morning, Claire called her boss. Not Mason, her actual boss. She didn't call to apologize or explain herself. I sat on the porch swing with my coffee while she paced the white sand below, her phone pressed to her ear, the ocean wind tossing her hair. I couldn't hear the entire conversation, but I caught the most important fragments. My campaign was presented without my permission. No, I am not being emotional. Yes, I have the original dated files. And then, the sentence that made me set my coffee cup down. "Then please consider this my official resignation." When she finally walked back up the porch steps, her face was pale, but her eyes were brighter than I'd ever seen them. "I think I might have just ruined my life," she whispered. I handed her my mug. "Or finally started it." She took a shaky sip. "That sounds like something written on a cheap motivational mug, Ryan. I'm a producer. I know what hits the right notes." She turned to look out at the rolling waves. "I'm terrified." "Good," I said softly. "It means it actually matters." She looked back at me, and a quiet, profound understanding passed between us. It wasn't a dramatic movie moment with swelling music. It was just real. "I don't want this to be a rebound, Ryan," she said honestly. "And I don't want to rush into things just because the beach is beautiful and my professional life is currently on fire. That is incredibly reasonable. And I don't want to go back home and pretend this week never happened." I stood up slowly, carefully, as if a single wrong movement might scare the moment away. "Then we won't pretend." She stepped closer, her eyes locked onto mine. "What do we do then?" "We go back home," I said. "We get coffee in the hallway. We make actual, real plans. We let it be slow." Claire smiled, a soft, beautiful expression. "No speeding, no speeding." She looked down at my hand, then slowly slid her fingers through mine. That was all. No dramatic rain-slicked kiss, no actual sand proposal. Just her hand warm in mine while the tide slowly crept in. And somehow, that simple touch felt infinitely bigger than anything else. We did eventually kiss, 2 nights later on our very last evening at the cottage, after eating takeout on the porch and watching the sun melt like orange sherbet into the water. I told her she had a bit of sauce on her thumb. She wiped the wrong hand. I laughed, and she leaned in and kissed me, like she had finally decided to stop asking permission from her own fear. When we finally returned to our apartment building, Mrs. Alvarez was waiting in the lobby. She looked at Claire, then at me, and then pointedly at our 2 carefully separate suitcases. "No ring?" she asked, disappointed. Without missing a beat, Claire smiled. "He's still on probation, Mrs. Alvarez." The older woman patted my arm approvingly. "Good. It builds character." 6 months later, Claire had officially left her old agency behind and started freelancing from a sunlit studio filled with leafy green plants, her own name proudly displayed on the glass door. Mason texted her twice. She never replied. I stopped taking every single extra shift at the radio station, and my sister actually cried tears of joy when I told her I was taking vacation days on purpose. Claire and I lived in our separate apartments, 4A and 4B, for a while. We dated like normal people, if normal people had a shared history that involved a viral fake engagement and a crustacean hostage situation. By the following spring, we booked the exact same cottage. The pirate bunk bed was still there, and so was the porch swing. This time, however, we only booked one bedroom. At sunset on our first night back, Claire walked ahead of me along the shoreline, barefoot, laughing as the cold foam chased her ankles. I had a small velvet box tucked safely into my pocket. Not because the internet had predicted it a year ago, and not because anyone else expected it, but because the joke that had started everything in a dingy apartment hallway had become the truest, most beautiful thing in my life. She turned back to look at me, her dark hair lit gold by the dying sun, and held out her hand. "Are you coming, Spider-Man?" I took her hand, holding it tight. The ring could wait just one more minute, before I asked her to walk with me forever. I wanted to savor exactly how this moment felt. The ocean breathing beside us, her warm palm in mine, and the entire wide future opening up before us like a door we were finally brave enough to walk through together.